This is Mark R. Hassan, and welcome to ArtScopeTO, my occasional podcast series featuring interviews with artists, and my first podcast since the pandemic began, way back in late March of 2020. COVID-19 has and will continue to affect the physical and mental health of us in some way for some time, as well as the financial security of artists, as cities like Toronto continue to experience radical dynamic shifts in the costs of living, working, and to some extent, relearning some of the everyday habits and social norms which were curtailed, shuttered, or put into stasis. I first interviewed Toronto-based painter Donna Wise in December of 2017 at the Urban Gallery, where her beautiful large-scale abstract paintings were showcased for people to see and feel. They're obsessively composed with circular patterns, imprints, shapes, and dotted textures, and Wise's paintings are meant to be experienced in person, with eyes absorbing the striking colors and solid, bold backgrounds, and fingers for the pricks, mounds, droplets, and streaming lines of the dried hard paint and canvas surfaces. Where observing some art requires a respectful fixed distance, Wise's work requires movement, standing at a distance to absorb the scope of the canvases that can spread as wide as 96 inches, approaching a work slowly to be affected by the mingling circular patterns, then getting closer to notice the textures and layers of shapes and paint, and gazing a few inches from the canvas to examine the density of the colors and the round and sharp features of the painting which reaches out towards the observer. Her latest work includes Mississippi Burning, a tribute to 4 girls who died in a church bombing during the 1960s, consisting of muted colors and patterns fading into an uneven ripe yellow background. The massive Carnaval Brasilia, with creamy colors more than evocative of cake decor, and Chantilly lace, a giant square of circular lace patterns which merge from white to gold above a shiny background of wide black waves. I've posted a variety of stills in the editor's blog at KQEK.com, and although our roughly half-hour conversation is ostensibly about creating art, doing so during the pandemic and the unique disruptions figure heavily, as well as specific challenges which will continue to force artists to fight for resources, space, and the attention of a public that's hopefully hungrier to see and experience art in person, as well as online. Our Q&A begins with perhaps one's first impression of Wise's work, the expansive size of her canvases, which go back to her first works, and the unique, massive downtown studio which today sounds like an impossible dream in contemporary Toronto.
Always been attracted to large sizes.
Yeah.
And had a beautiful studio down at King and by the Lamport Stadium, 22-foot ceilings and 1,000 square feet. So the canvases were spread out on the floor, and I would spread out 15 to 20 canvases. Not all of them would have been completed, but 15 for sure. And then when I didn't have the space, and we made a studio here where we were very lucky because the ceilings are 10 feet high, I was reduced down to the 5x5 or the 5x4, press it for the 5x96, that's the big Carnaval Brazil down there. But I still like large canvases. That's where I get my momentum, the feeling that I'm talking to the canvas. Color is my impetus. Color just comes from the heart. I don't think about it. I do have a playbook for each series. Even though it's abstract, I do design the design. I draw it out very sketchily at the beginning, and then I work on it as I move through the process of doing the canvas. All the colors for each canvas are designed and made, so they are in pots or jars, those colors. Most colors just go on that one canvas. I very rarely duplicate that series of colors on the next canvas. So the colors are particular to that particular canvas. And that is designated by the ground color. And I use geometry in the design. If you look at the abstracts, you can do geometric equations from how the designs fit into that piece of work. And that, I think, has always made the canvases very balanced for me. I never have a project when I'm doing a canvas. I'm never solving a problem that a lot of people are told to do in art school. We're going to do this, show me how you're doing it. I just paint, period. What comes into my head, what I've decided for that series, when I'm finished, I never repeat it. Never repeat it. I may repeat some of the elements, I may repeat some of the colors, but because the colors are mixed individually for each canvas, they don't necessarily go to the next series because those colors are all mixed again. I use what is called heavy paint. Golden is the product, very heavy paint. I don't use the fluid paints. I take the heavy paint. I may use it as it is, or I may add acrylic medium to it to make it even thicker so I can mold it. That's how I get the dots and the spikes. Or I may use water to thin it out. But I rarely use water. I usually use the heavy paint. And then I lacquer the paintings when they're finished, basically to protect them. Mm-hmm. Because with all the moving around from one place to the next, the lacquer protects the canvas from being scratched or marked. And then I name them. Now in the beginning, I had trouble naming them because I felt I just want to paint them. I can't worry about a name. This isn't talking to me. It isn't doing anything. And I used to get the Globe and Mail, and there used to be a racing page. So I would look after the weekend, I would look at the horses that won on the racing page. And that's how I named my canvases. And I was doomed when the racing page was taken out of the paintings. So now it takes me quite a while to name the paintings.
For the canvas, you're mentioning that there's different densities that you apply to it. It's to help support the paint that you also add to it. Yes. And the textures.
When I'm preparing the canvas is very basic. It's a very basic width, I guess. You can get stronger ones, you can get weaker ones. You can get thinner canvas so that a lot of people use it so the paint stains through it. That's how Frankenthaler and a lot of Mark Rothko stained their canvases, so to speak. I like a canvas that's very hard. It's almost like masonite that I paint on. So the preparation for preparing those canvases before I put any paint on takes about 7 days to do the whole series. And it actually is rock hard before I put any paint on it, just to support the paint because it's heavy paint and because I add the plastic medium to it. So I can have molding structures or make designs that are on the surface, not in the paint, but on the surface that I paint over. And then I'll add molding on top of that, as I've done a lot of them. In the series for Propeller, designs were added on top of the original painted surface. So the trick is I know which circle is the last one applied. So I often like to ask people, can you tell me which is the last circle applied? And it takes them a while to see it, but when I point it out, you can see that it is, because it's the heaviest circle on the series.
When you are painting, how are you able to judge the scope of the shapes that you add to ensure that they actually fit and that there's a balance?
That's where the geometry comes in. I failed math all through school until I got to grade 12 and I was in geometry. And I aced every equation only because I saw it. Geometry is a visual math. And it infuriated the teacher in the class because I couldn't tell it was ABC equals BDCE. I just knew that's how the equation worked. And I repeated it because you get the equation and you have to draw it. And I would draw it. And that's what I do. That's why it's balanced. I'm not applying any other principles to it when I'm doing it. I don't think I know them. I didn't go to art school. I'm absolutely self-taught. I don't measure anything. Sometimes I do make mistakes. Sometimes I'm not happy with where I put that. And I step back and I go back to the sketchbook or the playbook and see where I started, where I've made the mistake. And then I come back. I can correct it by correcting the design.
Yeah, I think balance is one of the strongest elements. Whether it's something slightly smaller or one of the larger scopes, there is always a balance in terms of what you see within as well as the open space that's
yes.
found.
Now I've had other artists who like to critique my art say, but you haven't filled in all the spaces. Where's your negative space or your positive space? And I kind of look at them and say, well, where is that? I've never painted with that information in my head. I just go for it.
Can we talk a little bit about the past year and a half in terms of how things were before the pandemic and then as an artist, how things affected you afterwards in terms of either your process, the subjects that you wanted to choose, And then if there were extra challenges in essentially coming up with, materializing, and completing those projects.
The pandemic, for me, was a blessing in disguise. I had unlimited, uninterrupted hours and time and months in the studio. We're either going to the cottage, or we're going to Florida, or we're traveling, or there's a family due. So my time was always being interrupted. To have even 3 months to paint steadily was wonderful. But I had 2 years, 18 months, and I just went for it. It was strange in the fact that I knew what was going on in the world. It was very depressing. It was very upsetting. I could go into my bubble and escape and be as happy as a clam. I'd come upstairs and Daniel would be morose and upset and angry, and I would get the emotion in the house back on keel, or back to being not so depressed. Not that he was depressed, he was just distressed. We were distressed we couldn't see our children or our grandchildren. We were locked in the house, and that affected us. It didn't affect my process in painting. I just took off. It was like I was in my studio down on King Street. As far as the outside world in the art world, I had 2 shows canceled, one in 2020 at the Propeller and one in 2021 at the Propeller. Both shows were canceled because of COVID. One show, a group show, did happen in Niagara Falls. The paintings were mounted on March 30th. I sold the painting on the first day, and the gallery was shut down the next day. And that's sort of what's been happening. So in that respect, I've been lucky. I've always been a person that's looking for challenges. I'm always reaching for something else, always exploring other things I can do with the art. So there were other shows that I could get into in other galleries, one in California, another one in Toronto. They were all online, but I chose them because of the type of gallery they were, their history with their artists. So every month I was in something. So that kept me going. And even though they're online, it does go on the resume as something you've been doing. It shows you have been active. You didn't just back out completely. Mm-hmm. I was terribly disappointed when the show at Propeller was canceled this year. I'd worked very hard for that show. And that's what it was, and that it's what it is for a lot of artists. And a lot of galleries have just disappeared. And I don't think it's going to come back so quickly. I really don't.
It seems to be the same thing with concert venues.
Yes.
Where it's taken such a toll. Because I think in Toronto we had the longest lockdown in North America.
Yes.
And it feels like
and we still have that, basically.
Yeah, to an extent we do. And there are certain venues that I made a point of visiting to see, is that restaurant still there?
Yes.
Can I still have brunch when this opens up?
Yes.
I wonder if there's something similar where did you venture in to see what's left or what's still there and
I'm constantly investigating galleries to see who's up and who's doing what. Some have just opened. This gallery in Niagara Falls has opened. Another gallery I was looking at in Guelph has opened. So they're starting to open. I don't know how much traffic they're having. I don't know what their sales are like. But at least they're opening, and they've been eager and waiting to open. They haven't disappeared. But I think they're the lucky ones. Because I think in Toronto, even the bigger galleries have gone online. And spaces have become very expensive to rent or hold on to. And staff. Mm-hmm. So I really don't know what's going to happen.
Maybe we can talk about one of the subjects that I've been keenly interested in for the last while, which is because there's so many condos that are being built, because the land prices have gone completely insane in this city. There was it was actually a fully detached house in Scarborough, corner lot, good sized plot, but it easily went for $1 million. And the house was just, not in the best of shape. Then you see on sites like BlogTO, this tiny shack or garage for $1 million. Yes. So that has to be symptomatic of the kind of mania that's going on, where land is the most important regardless of what the existing edifice is to the community.
Yes.
So for the arts community, Do you have any thoughts on those changes that have happened and whether some of that can sort of be saved in a way? Because I years ago, I think Barbara Hall made a point of setting aside or sort of designating,
amount of money,
yeah,
yes.
like this is an area, this is going to be for arts.
Yes.
And little by little, developers have been whittled away at it.
It's been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. I think there's very little money in Toronto's coffers, the city's coffers, to support the artists. I just got a listing this morning for an artist advertising studio space. She's willing to share it. And I think that's what artists are going to try and do, or they will try and look at space now that's empty, where a group of them can share a space to even just do what they want to do in studio. But the prices for rentals or to utilize the space are just, artists can't afford that. And if they have to travel there, if they have to get supplies there, I mean, that's all part of the package.
I think when you talk about supplies, that's another component where
Yes.
a lot of shops, like so much has gone online, especially in the last year. And my attempt to try and get some normalcy was to just go into a Canadian Tire. So go into a place I normally would go to find odds and ends and knickknacks. And I imagine it's the same kind of thing that if you go into an art supply shop, you want to know that the things that you need are there in addition to stuff that you can discover.
Not only that, when I knew I was going to do the show for Propeller, literally in October, November, I phoned the art supply store that I used and I said, I need X amount of canvases, these sizes, and I need X amount of paint, these are the colors. Whatever I needed, I made a list and sent it to him. So he said, Donna, I can send you 3 canvases. We don't have the rest. Now I can scout around the city and see what I can pull together. So that was a constant challenge. And then they were shut down. So then you couldn't get anything. And then it was curbside only. So you couldn't get in to see the quality of what you were looking for. So those were all challenges. Now, I don't know whether I was lucky because I had that show ready in my head to do, and I started collecting product. So I was thinking ahead of the game. But after January the 1st, everything was closed. And I would, email them and said, well, we can't help you. We're shut down. I suspect other artists fell into the same thing. And the same with art transportation. You couldn't get an art transport company to deliver your art because they were shut down. They had sent their staff home. They weren't paying anybody. So all these little things backed up and affected the community. They'll come back. The bigger ones are already back. The big art transport people are already back, but they do big transports and make big crates and things like that. But these smaller things, I use DeSayers for my art supplies, and they've been fabulous. But they had difficulty getting me the canvases I wanted. I mean, even I phoned Golden, which is in Buffalo, but nothing was coming across the border.
Yeah, well, it was brutally slow.
Yes.
I had something that I purchased off eBay, and it sat for 3 weeks, literally at the border.
Yes. So when you're in production and you want this to work right now or yesterday, so that's difficult, and I suspect all artists have run into that. I know that a lot of the artists at Propeller have reduced the size of canvases they're working on. They're working on all these small canvases, 8 by 10 inches, 12 by 12, 12 by 24. I think now they're starting to work on bigger canvases, but they filled their time working on small canvases because that's what was available left in the store. Well, I shouldn't say left in the store, but that's what was available because it's probably more prominently sold than these big canvases.
And just what are your thoughts on the increasing flight of different artists from different disciplines that are leaving Toronto because of the expenses and finding homes in the outlying areas, which in turn are becoming more expensive because of that? In your eyes, for example, what can an artist do in order to create a home base in the city?
I think the pricing of homes is, I don't know how they manage it. They can rent maybe a condominium 400 square feet for an outrageous price, but where are they going to paint? Where are they going to live in that space? I know that artists are moving out of town. Artists have always moved out of town. I mean, Will Ronald and his group at that time, who were in the same building I were in, they had 6,000 square feet. And the landlords of the building started squeezing them for rent. And 6,000 square feet is more than this house is. And there was a whole group of them. Sorrel Etrog, Joyce Whelan, John Snow, they were all in the building. They all moved out. They moved peripherally out of Toronto. I think there was a center that they set up, and they lived in sort of a group area where they supported and looked after each other. I think that may happen again. Today when I get this artist who's advertising for people to share studio space, that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And that may be the only way they survive, because they're not going to be able to afford the rent if they're not selling paintings. They have to have a sizable bank account in order to move in there and paint and pay the rent and pay for living expenses. It's going to be very slow.
How important do you think it is to be in Toronto compared to some of the outlying areas? Because obviously areas like Hamilton, they become enriched by a lot of the artists that have left.
Yes. I think there's a whole... Well, this artist studio was in Dundas, you see, and I think that Hamilton's become a new hot area for young people to move into. So that changes the complexion of the area. And I think that'll happen in the small towns. But one artist can't be supported by a small town. And they have to be proactive in seeking out galleries out there. They can't just expect to be successful in this town and sustain themselves. Maybe they can, but they're going to have... And I think you'll see artists starting to have multiple galleries. A gallery isn't going to be able to own them anymore. They're going to have to say, no, I either can show here and I can show here and here. If you don't agree to that, then I'm out of here and I'll go here and here. And I think that's going to start happening. And multiple galleries is good for artists. Toronto hasn't felt that that's been a positive thing, but it is a positive thing. It's better for the artist. Her work gets shown around and everyone's happy.
You mentioned that a lot of work has gone online.
Yes.
How important has it been now to maintain a presence, but also what has been lost in terms of being able to see it on a screen and on a phone versus actually seeing it in person, because it's a very different experience?
I think if you're known and you have a known name, you can go online and be successful. I think if you're not known, your art has to be seen. I don't care who you are or what you do. Now, there are a lot of people who do portraitures of people or animals or landscapes. That's always been a Canadian look, is birch trees and landscapes. Those paintings always sell. They'll always sell whether they're online or not. But someone like myself is abstract. It has to be seen. It's not so easily seen or looked for. And that's just what it is.
What are some of the unique tools that you've used to create textures, and what are some of the most extreme?
So the earlier paintings, I used plastic rollers. I used brushes to do the ground coat. But with the rest of the paint that goes onto the canvases, I've used a variety of things. Credit cards to scrape, toothbrushes. I'll take the toothbrush and flick it to get... I'll use things like leaves and paint over them just to get the vein structure. Doesn't look like a leaf, but I've got the imprint of the vein structure. I've used rakes on the big canvases. I use combs with big teeth on them. But for these big circles, I start with sieves. It's totally round. I can't draw a circle. I have to rely on something that's already round to begin with. I start with sieves. I then graduated to pot covers. And the biggest ones, believe it or not, are garbage pail covers. And that's a project. Anything that's round, I use a variety of jars. Anything that's round, I'll take the edge and put the paint on it and apply it onto the paint. Now, when I do that, I have to put the plastic molding in it because the paint will slide off the edge. So if you put the plastic polymer in it, it stays on the top of the rim. And I can build it up. I can build it up on the rim, so the rim gets quite heavy and quite pointy. But the garbage pail covers are the most fun because they're bigger than me practically. And you have to dot the paint on and not get it on. And the other thing is when you go to stick it on the canvas, there's a suction. So depending on how you pull it off, that's the imprint you can make. So I'm controlling that imprint that the circle is making. And the same with the dots. I use eyedroppers. And if you touch the canvas and then dot your color, It may be rounder or smaller. So I apply the pressure on the canvas and then dot it, and that makes the pressure. That's why some circles are very, very tiny and some get larger, like in this black one. So it's all part of the experience, and my hand-eye coordination is quite remarkable. And I'm right there. My nose is right on the canvas.
I guess one of the things you get out of it is that it remains fun.
Oh, I love it. I couldn't be happier. My husband comes down and says, it's 4:00. You've been down here for hours. And I said, yes, I'll be up in 20 minutes. He says, that means an hour, right? I said, I don't know. I'm not looking at the clock. But I love it. I paint for the sheer joy of painting, just because I don't plan on anything. I just do it. And Chantilly Lace and Mississippi Burning are the first two paintings I've ever made a social comment. I've always said, I'm not making a social comment with this art. You can't look for something. There isn't a mystery in these paintings. Don't try and find something that isn't there. The color is the emotion. If the color can stir something in you, then fine. But there's no story here. It's just color and how it reacts on the canvas and how you react to it. And that's what abstract painting is.
Sustaining, if not rediscovering the joy of creating, is maybe more important today than it was nearly 2 years ago when the pandemic began to emerge. At least once a month, a friend and I have a lazy brunch at By the Way, a small restaurant by Bloor in Brunswick, and part of that social and comfort food experience includes a huge painting that spans the entire length of the main wall. It's a small example of where art exists and how it adds to the social experiences we have and the relationships we foster with artists. We could have blank walls and silent rooms in public and private spaces. But more often than not, we create spaces to include art, maybe as organic elements or centerpieces. Perhaps the most joyful surprise when the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were excavated from their respective tombs of volcanic ash were the statues in the gardens of villas, the mosaics on the floors, and the vivid depictions of social and private moments, embellishing existing luxuries, enhancing functional rooms, or evoking environments to smother the drabness of bare walls and cold surfaces. Wise's paintings are held in private, corporate, and public collections around the world, and her website at artbydonnawise.com and Instagram page Donna Wise Fine Art feature further information and stills and news of upcoming shows. I'd like to thank Donna Wise for her generous time, her husband for shepherding their 2 poodles during the Q&A, and Glenda Fordham at Fordham P.R. for facilitating the interview and providing cold water on a ridiculously hot and humid day that's also typical for Toronto. And although the Urban Gallery has closed its Queen Street address, gallery manager Calvin Hambrook and curator Alan Sugar have plans to reopen the gallery at a still-to-be-decided location. The editor's blog at KQEK.com has links to prior Q&As with artists showcased at the Urban Gallery, and the Urban Gallery's website includes a full list of featured artists with links to their respective websites. And near the end of July, I'll be debuting Alternate Tracks, a personal history of soundtracks and film music. So watch for further details at KQEK.com's website and social media alerts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Lastly, this podcast was recorded, edited, mixed, and lemon-scented at Big Head Amusements. For inquiries on custom audio and video services and voice work, please visit bigheadamusements.com for details and samples and contact info. Wherever you may be, stay safe, get fully vaccinated, and thanks for listening. This program is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, Libsyn, SoundCloud, and Stitcher channels. This podcast is copyrighted 2021 by Mark R. Hassan.